I'm Jessica, standing in my office, looking out at the bustling city below. I can't help but recall that fateful night at my father's law firm Gala. It was a turning point, not just for my career but for our relationship. My father, Mr. Thompson, is a well-respected senior partner at Thompson and Associates, a traditional law firm that specializes in corporate law. He's always been set in his ways, believing that a real career was in law, medicine, or finance. I, on the other hand, have a passion for cybersecurity. 6 years ago, I founded CyberShield, a company dedicated to protecting legal and financial institutions from data breaches. We've had an incredible run, with last year's revenue hitting $50 million and this year's projection at $75 million. Our client list includes some of the biggest names in the legal industry, all except my father's firm. 3 years ago, I pitched CyberShield to Thompson and Associates. The managing partner, Mr. Harris, simply dismissed me, saying they had it under control. Fast forward 2 months ago, and they suffered a massive ransomware attack. They lost weeks of billable hours and had to pay a hefty $380,000 to decrypt their files. The night of the gala at the Grand Hotel, I was given a name tag that read Guest IT Support. My father's assistant printed it without asking what I actually did. As I stood there, surrounded by lawyers in expensive suits, my father introduced me to 2 senior partners. "This is my daughter. She plays around with computers. We don't really understand it," he said. The partners barely gave me a second look. I found a quiet corner and checked my phone. The next day was the National Cybersecurity Innovation Awards in New York. CyberShield had been nominated in 3 categories. The keynote speaker was Dr. Miller, a former CIA cybersecurity expert and a mentor of mine from my days at Stanford. He'd personally invited me to speak on a panel about the future of legal cybersecurity, which would be broadcast live at 8 p.m. Eastern, right during the gala. Just then, a voice interrupted my thoughts. It was Ms. Davis, a senior partner at Grant & Company, our biggest client. She told me that my father's firm had invited them to discuss a potential partnership, but after their ransomware disaster, they weren't interested. She also revealed that Mr. Harris had asked her for cyber security recommendations and she told him to call me, but he never did. "Pride," she said. "They'd rather hire strangers than admit your expertise." When I mentioned to her that my father didn't know about my success, she was shocked. I showed her my name tag and said, "According to this, I'm IT support." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then she looked at her watch and said the timing of the awards and the gala was perfect, but wouldn't tell me why. At 7:45 p.m. the lights dimmed and Mr. Harris took the stage. He welcomed everyone and talked about the firm's successful year, briefly mentioning the cyber incident they'd faced. Then he announced that they'd be live, streaming the National Cybersecurity Innovation Awards. The screen behind him came to life, showing the awards hall in New York. Dr. Miller took the stage and started talking about the crisis in the legal industry due to ransomware attacks. He mentioned how one firm he'd investigated had lost millions in damages. Then he shifted to the solutions, and the screen showed CyberShield's logo. He talked about how CyberShield, founded by me, had revolutionized the way law firms approach cybersecurity. My father's head snapped towards me, his eyes wide. On the screen, I was giving my pre-recorded speech about how legal data is vulnerable and how CyberShield focuses on prevention. The lawyers at the gala were completely engrossed. Dr. Miller then invited me on stage, and as I walked up on the screen, my father's face went from red to white. I talked about emerging threats and our new AI protocols. When my segment ended, Dr. Miller encouraged law firms to recognize cybersecurity as fundamental to their practice. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Mr. Harris stood up, looking ashen. Ms. Davis walked over to him, her expression neutral. My father came to my table, still holding his drink. "Was that you?" he asked. I told him that I'd founded CyberShield 6 years ago and that I'd try to tell him, but he never listened. Mr. Harris then approached me and said they'd like to discuss bringing me on as a consultant. I reminded him that they'd missed the opportunity after their ransomware attack when I'd offered emergency services, and they never returned my calls. Davis added that CyberShield's client list was full of their competitors. My father then asked why I hadn't told him I was successful. I listed all the times I'd try to share my achievements, like at family dinners and holidays, but he'd always changed the subject or made jokes about my work. I held up my name tag and said, "You called me IT support." I decided to leave. I told him that CyberShield was nominated for 3 awards and that he could watch or pretend the night didn't happen. I walked out of the hotel, leaving 350 lawyers watching me go. CyberShield won all 3 awards. I celebrated with my team at our office, toasting our success. That night, my father called me multiple times, but I let the calls go to voicemail. The next morning, my inbox was flooded with messages. 6 law firms requested consultations, 3 industry publications wanted interviews, 2 venture capital firms were interested in funding our expansion, and there was an email from Thompson and Associates formally requesting our services. I forwarded it to my sales team with instructions for standard rates and no priority treatment. 3 days later, my father showed up at my office. He apologized, saying he was wrong about everything. I corrected him, saying he'd been dismissive, not just wrong. I told him that he needed to prove he valued me for who I was, not who he wished I'd be. 6 months later, he sent me an article about AI-driven legal research and asked for my thoughts. It was the first time he'd ever shown real interest in my work. I called him back, and we had a long conversation. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Success, I've learned, isn't about proving others wrong. It's about building something so significant that their validation becomes optional.